Hello, and welcome to Making Waves, where we interview spectacular individuals doing amazing things in a difficult world. I'm Drew Lifeit, and I have an echo. Hold on a second. Okay, I'm back. I'm your host, Drew Lifeit. On today's Making Waves, what the heck is going on at the southern border of the United States? And I'm still echoing. Hold a second. Technical difficulties. I'm back again. What the heck is going on at the southern border of the United States, and how can policy make it better? To clue us in, our guest today is immigration attorney Sara Dady of Sara Dady Law Group, LLC. She's speaking to us from Rockford, Illinois. Let me tell you a little bit about Sara. As an immigration attorney for the last 2 decades, Sara has helped thousands of individuals and families navigate the tangled maze of U.S. immigration laws, regulations, and policies under several presidential administrations. She writes that her career has given her a wide base of knowledge, including federal tax law, criminal law, family law, trade, and labor laws. In 2018, Sara ran for election to the U.S. House of Representatives to represent Illinois' 16th district against incumbent at the time, Adam Kinzinger. Regarding the aspects of public policy she feels passionate about at that time, Sara told Ballotpedia that, quote, as an immigration attorney, her passion is welcoming people to the country she loves best. Everyone should have the opportunity to succeed regardless of what they look like, where they come from, or how much money they have, she said. The American dream is as simple as doing a job you take pride in and being able to support yourself and your family. Welcome, Sara Dady, to Making Waves. Hi, Sara.
Hi, Drew. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here this morning to talk
Excellent.
about my favorite subject, which my
Right.
husband says is my only subject, immigration law.
Well, I'd just like to let listeners out there know that I have spoken to Sara before. We have met in person, and I felt her enthusiasm for what she does. I felt that she's doing good things. Obviously, illegal immigration, if we want to call it that, is a very contentious issue in the U.S. political scene. But I'm hoping that, we can get Sara's humanistic take on things and help us fill in the gaps. Because, just for example, me as an observer, of course, I hear things in the news, but maybe I'm not diving into the details as much as I could. Anyway, so welcome, Sara. And first of all, could you just give us a little nutshell how you decided to get into immigration law?
Sure. So it was an accident. I didn't intend to practice immigration law when I was in law school. I thought I would do a general practice or maybe securities law because I was working as a broker at the time I was going to law school. But after I graduated and passed the bar, I signed up to volunteer with Minnesota Advocates for Human Rights. They gave me an asylum case. And after I did that case, I'm like, this is all I want to do. It was amazing to me that the United States could welcome in someone who came from a country that was just devastated by civil strife and have a safe haven, a safe place for them and their family to live. And that gave me a feeling of extraordinary pride in our country. So after that, I said, immigration's all I want to do.
Great. That's amazing to hear. And I mean, really, when you think about it, that's the story. I haven't lived in my country in a long time, but that is the story of each of us, hopefully, unless we're indigenous Americans, have a story about our relatives landing on the shores of the United States. Of course, things are a little bit different. Of course, like I said, when politics gets involved. I wanted to read, if you will, Sara, if you'll allow me to read a couple of snippets. These are from artificial intelligence, but I trust that they are good. It's just a couple of little pieces of information to give a little bit of context. One snippet says, according to U.S. Customs and Border Protection, there were 2.38 million encounters with migrants along the southwest border of the United States, and that's a record high. The estimated number of undocumented immigrants living in the United States is 11.3 million, which is about 3% of the total population. Given those, if we consider those trustable numbers, could you talk a little bit about what's been going on in the United States in terms of people crossing the border?
Sure. So I think there's a real disconnect between what Americans think our immigration system is and what it actually is. So U.S. immigration was set up in 1965, the Immigration Nationality Act, and that is still the system that we have today, 58 years later. Even though, we've had increased traffic and the world has changed just a little bit in 58 years and half a century, but this is still the system that we have. So, I think that most people would agree that no one should be undocumented in the United States. Nobody should be coming in without permission. We should absolutely know who's here. But that's not what our system does. Not everyone has a way to apply to come to the United States legally. There's not a mechanism for that. People can't walk into a U.S. embassy abroad and say, I would like to apply for a 3-year work visa or a 5-year work visa, and then, be fingerprinted, pay a processing fee, and get approved or denied. That does not exist in the U.S. system. So when people feel like they have to flee their home country because of civil unrest, political instability, natural disasters, the only mechanism under U.S. law is to apply for asylum. And by the way, our asylum system was created in 1980 and has received no maintenance since 1980. So they come to our border seeking asylum, which many of them won't qualify for because asylum law is very restrictive. Mm-hmm. So, as people get pushed out of their home countries, we don't have a way to really regulate the flow of people coming to the United States under our current laws.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds very antiquated, considering that the global situation seems to be getting more and more complicated when you consider climate change, economic dysfunction, political dysfunction in other countries. Maybe could you tell us a little bit about your daily work in relation to that, and sort of what kinds of situations you run into on an individual level, if you can. I mean, I don't want you to give any names, obviously, but
obviously I wouldn't.
Right.
So I practice family-based immigration. There are two prime ways to get a green card, or what's called an immigrant visa or permanent residency in the United States. Either you have to have a family member who's a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident who can petition for you. A visa number has to be available, and we do limit visa numbers for certain family members. So that can create a decades-long wait for a visa number. And I also do deportation defense. So you have people who are here legally or people who came in without permission. But if they have certain immigration violations, they can be put in deportation proceedings. And that includes people who are here legally, people who did it the right way. But after they're here, they get an immigration violation.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And so how tough does that make it for them to, be able to stay, or, what typically happens?
So it depends on the situation, depends on the immigration violation. My favorite quote from the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, federal court here, is that the Immigration Nationality Act is like the tax laws in its complexity and certain to accelerate the aging process of judges. So that's how complicated our immigration laws
Mm.
are.
Mhm.
Before 1924, nobody needed an immigration lawyer to come into the US. Now there are over 10,000 immigration lawyers in the United States helping people to navigate this very obstacle-filled road that we call our immigration system. So a typical day for me is I'll have a consultation, screen someone to see if they're eligible to apply for permanent residency or some other kind of visa. And if they have certain immigration violations, they're not eligible. And I have to tell them that they
Mhm.
need the laws to change before they would be eligible. And many times these are people who came into the United States over 20 years ago. They have US citizen children. They work or own a business. They own a home, but they never had a legal way to come. And they still don't have a legal way to apply for status in the US because our laws are so old. I tell people, think of it this way. It's like a highway that's not received any maintenance in half a century and has had increased traffic. How many people could navigate that road? And the US response on the political side, instead of just repaving and widening the road so, you can better manage the traffic, the response is inevitably, oh, we just need to hire more state troopers to patrol a road that barely anyone can drive down.
Mm.
That's what Customs and Border Protection is. They're like
Mhm.
the police for the border, right?
Right.
We already spend 17 billion a year on immigration enforcement. But if we really wanted to regulate the flow of people and know who's coming into the United States, which we do need to know, we have that right as a sovereign nation. Congress has to change our immigration system. They have to modernize it. We have to give people a way to apply for visas to come in before they come to our border. And especially now, as you pointed out, with climate change and increased political instability, civil strife, natural disasters, the problem's only going to get worse with people migrating. And it's not just the United States. We're living in a time where there are 90 million people displaced worldwide from their home countries. That's the largest number in humanity, you know. So this problem isn't going to go away. And the US, Congress specifically, if they want to address it, it's not by throwing more money at Customs and Border Protection. It's about modernizing our immigration system so people do have a way to apply for legal status to come and live here. And, that's a humanitarian obligation that the US has anyway.
Right. Right.
President Biden announced that he's willing to resettle 125,000 refugees per year in the
Mhm.
US. But again, there are 90 million people displaced worldwide, and that number's growing every day with each
Mm.
new war.
Mhm.
Now
So
there's
there's
an additional million people displaced.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, it sounds like it's just accommodating a drop in the bucket, really. Then.
Yeah, and I hear all the time people say, well, the United States doesn't have enough room. We have enough people. We have enough immigrants. We have too many immigrants coming in. Well, in 1900, immigrants made up about 15% of US population. Today, immigrants make up 12% of US population. So we actually have fewer immigrants today than we did at the turn of the 20th century.
Mhm.
And anyone who's been to the United States knows not only do we have plenty of space, we have a huge need for workers. We have a
Right.
labor shortage of about 5 million people right now.
Mm.
And so not only can we meet our humanitarian obligation with offering a safe place for people who have been displaced to come and live, we actually need these people.
Right.
We need them. Our population growth is slowing. It's at its slowest level ever in the history of our nation. And we need more people. And
Mhm.
immigrants are perfect because they tend to come here at prime working age We haven't invested 1 cent in their education or healthcare, and they come in and they start working and paying taxes.
Right. Right.
So,
It's interesting, actually, that there's such a parallel too with Europe, because there's a big labor shortage in Europe right now as well, in theory. And I even know somebody in my family, actually, who's helping assist people from Asia come, for example, to Hungary to work in specific, let's say, accounting jobs, for example.
yeah, well, the US is always, I like to call US policy um, ambivalent with immigrants. I think that most Americans, like myself, I always believed the US was the original immigrant nation, right?
Mm,
That's what
mhm,
made us great, welcoming in all these immigrants. But actually, the US has had two themes in our immigration laws. One, restricting who can come in and making it easy to deport people who at the time were considered undesirable, right?
mhm,
And one group of people were Asians.
mm,
The US passed the Chinese Exclusion Act after we built the railroads in 1885, thereabouts. After we had Chinese immigrants come in and build the railroads, and they started settling, and Congress had concerns about, you know, um, a group that made up less than 0.002% of our population depressing US wages and
mhm,
concerns about racial purity.
mm,
So they banned the Chinese from immigrating to the United States. And then a
mhm,
few years later, Congress figured out that China was not the only country in Asia. And so then they banned all Asian laborers from immigrating to the US. And those bans stood until World War II, when all of our men went off to fight in World War II, and we actually needed workers.
mhm,
And so then we repealed those bans and let
mm,
Asians start immigrating to the United States again.
mhm.
Um, so, our economic prosperity, our economic needs are always tied directly to immigration and our policy,
Mhm, mhm.
for better or worse.
Right, Sarah. Yeah, you have touched on. I'm very. I'm trying to be very deft and trying to avoid some of the. I don't know, how can I say, really contentious political issues, and don't really want to talk about party and things like that. But of course, a few years ago, when it comes to sort of a specific type of person coming into the United States, a few years ago, someone characterized Mexicans crossing the border as quote unquote drug dealers and rapists. What, in your experience, what would you say about people that you've met coming into the United States?
Oh, well, people are people, right? There's not a negative characteristic based on someone's race. That doesn't define who they are. Humans are humans, no matter what they look like or where they're from or how much money they have. And I firmly believe people are generally good. For my practice, my job is to help people immigrate legally to the United States. So figure out if they do have a way to immigrate legally and then assist them with that process. And I think that the studies are very clear that the United States benefits more from immigrants than we suffer. So immigrants definitely contribute more than they take to the United States. And that's been my personal and professional experience with my
Hmm.
clients.
Hmm.
Um, but again, the US has this ambivalent relationship. Congress, in particular, there's this perception of what Americans look like and what they should look like.
Hmm.
And we have, Congress has used our immigration laws to favor immigrants from certain countries, primarily Northern Europe. In 1921, we passed something called a Quotas Act, which limited immigrant visas to other parts of the world, but favored Northern European immigrants. And this has been the theme throughout US immigration law. I mean, race is very deeply tied in our immigration laws. Um, so we still struggle with this in the US. I think that those notions are outdated. I think most Americans would agree it doesn't matter where a person is from. If they want to come and live in peace and work and pay taxes and raise a family and live a peaceful life, we should give them a lawful way to apply to come here and work. Again, it doesn't mean everyone will get approved, but there must be a process. And that's to our benefit. You know, we don't want 1 million people a year trying to cross our border without permission, right?
Right.
And hiring more police officers isn't going to solve that basic problem, which is just give people a way to apply for a visa outside of the United States, which doesn't currently exist.
Mm-hmm. This is just a reminder that you're watching Making Waves. My name is Drew Leifheit, and we're talking today to immigration attorney Sara Dady. We welcome your comments and questions in the chat. Waiting for the first comment or question. I know we have several people. I can see that there are some people watching. So yeah, please feel free. We'd love to react to them. But of course, we will continue the conversation right now. I have another little snippet of information. It says the cost of undocumented immigration to the U.S. is estimated to be between 116 billion and 240 billion per year. What about that, Sara? I mean, is there always going to be a cost to this? And I mean, obviously there are people that would say, oh, well, that money would be better spent here or there. But is there any way, to get out of this without spending a lot of money?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's a way to get out of it without spending a lot of taxpayer dollars. So our immigration system is housed under the Department of Homeland Security. That's where U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service is housed, and they process applications for green cards and other kinds of visas for people who are currently in the United States and work permits. And then we have Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which they're charged with going around and looking for people with immigration violations to put them in deportation proceedings. The immigration court, where deportation proceedings are, is housed under the Department of Justice. And immigration judges are employees of the Department of Justice. They're not Article 3 federal judges. But ICE, CBP, and the immigration courts are all funded by taxpayer dollars. USCIS and our U.S. embassies that process visa applications outside the U.S. are fee funded, which means non-citizens pay fees that pay for those workers, those federal workers, to process those applications.
Mm-hmm.
So if the government shuts down in 10 days, that means ICE, CBP, and the immigration courts are going to shut down. This whole deportation mechanism, right? USCIS will continue to process applications, and the U.S. embassies will continue to process visa applications. So if we wanted to save taxpayer dollars, Congress could simply pass immigration reform, creating a legalization program for people who are already here, who've been living here for decades. They pay the fees to pay for their own applications. And if we had a real worker visa program decoupled from specific employers that people could apply for outside of the US, they pay for their own application processing. So we would save billions and billions in taxpayer funds if we had an orderly system where people could simply apply for visas with these agencies that are fee funded, instead of spending all these taxpayer dollars on trying to keep people out, people who don't have a way to apply to come the right way in the first place, and trying to deport people that we actually need here. So the smart money would be on immigration reform, modernizing our system so it meets our economic needs, family reunification needs, and our humanitarian obligations.
Mhm.
In
Do you
terms
think?
of,
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, in terms of undocumented immigrants, uh,
Hmm.
Social Security notes that undocumented immigrants, people who are not authorized to work here, who are working under fake Social Security numbers or numbers that don't belong to them, pay 13 billion a year into our Social Security, which means if they were not paying in 13 billion a year, cuts to our Social Security program would have to start a lot earlier than 2035. The year that I retire, that I'm eligible for Social Security, is the year that cuts to our Social Security will start because we don't have enough people working and paying in, and we have too many people retiring and drawing benefits.
Mm.
And those cuts would have started earlier if it weren't for the about 3.5% undocumented immigrants living in the US.
Right. So yeah, it does sound that kind of having that reform would take a lot of chaos out of and sort of regulate things better. But do you think that would that price people out who maybe the that are in the most precarious situations? Would that prevent them from being able to come here?
Well, it depends on what the law is, right? What Congress decides. For a legalization program, there's a bill introduced to Congress right now that's pretty restrictive. I mean, the majority of the 10 to 11 million undocumented people in our country wouldn't qualify for it, probably, but millions would. What's attached to that bill is a $5,000 penalty. So they would have to pay a $5,000 penalty over so much time in order to apply for a green card. In my experience, um, immigrants who have been living here, undocumented, working, they save the money and they're willing to pay a civil penalty in order to have a future, a permanent, secure future in the United States. I have a lot of clients who are finally eligible to apply for legal status one way or another, who have been saving their money and they purchased houses here. They've started businesses, they buy cars. So I'm not sure that would price someone out.
Hmm.
And I do think a civil penalty is appropriate for a civil offense. You know, um, a lot of times people confuse a civil violation with a criminal violation. And it is true that someone who comes into the United States without permission, that is a federal misdemeanor. That's true. And it's also an immigration violation. It's two things.
Hmm.
And the government can certainly choose to prosecute someone for illegal entry to the US, a misdemeanor, or they can choose to just put them in deportation proceedings as a civil process. And normally we punish civil violations by a fine. So I think it's reasonable to say, well, if you violated a civil law, this is a fine, but the fine also has to be reasonable.
Hmm. Hmm. I'm dipping my toe again into domestic politics there, but I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what I've heard in the news regarding sanctuary cities and the situation that they find themselves in. What's been happening?
Oh, that's a great question. So, again, this is an example of Americans not understanding what our laws are. so, um, the Supreme Court, a long time ago, held that um, the federal government cannot force states to use their resources or law enforcement resources to uphold federal civil laws. Okay. And this came about because there was a federal law requiring background checks for gun purchases. And the law required county sheriffs and police to run these background checks. The Supreme Court said, oh, no, 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 no. This is a federal scheme. You cannot force states to use their law enforcement to uphold a federal civil law. That's a sanctuary. That's sanctuary. It means the federal government can't force states to do that. Federal immigration law is also a federal civil statutory scheme, right? So you can't force states, police officers to enforce federal civil immigration law. That's what a sanctuary city is. Every state, every town, every county in this nation is, by legal definition, a sanctuary city, a sanctuary state. So when a city says, look, ICE, we're not going to use our local police to go around looking for people with civil violations. We're going to focus on criminal violations, which is what their job is. That's sanctuary.
Mm-hmm.
And it's ironic to me that there's a large segment of the American population, which is all about states' rights, are screaming and crying about states and cities that refuse to use their resources to do a federal agent's job.
Mm-hmm.
That's states' rights.
Right.
So
Well,
every state is a sanctuary state.
Mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm. But what about, as I understand, for some political figures have, sent busloads and plane loads of migrants or immigrants to different cities just to, I don't know, cause a little bit of a ruckus?
Yeah, well, first of all, that's not how we treat human beings that are suffering and need help, right?
Right.
We don't lie to them, load them up on buses, and ship them off somewhere to be somebody else's problem. That is not a humane way to treat people. That is not an effective way of governing a nation. So that's first. Second, this is really a failure of Congress. It really is, because there's absolutely no reason why we should have so many people coming to our border who have no way to get work permits and come in and start working, who are unable to start making a life for themselves here with some resources to assist them while they do that. We're fully capable of doing it. We do it with refugees all the time. Refugees are people who've had their applications approved outside the US. They've proven that they will be persecuted if they have to return to their home country. They've been screened. We bring them in. They can immediately apply for Social Security, food stamps, all of that. And within a few years, they're working. They don't need benefits. I mean, that's the amazing thing about humans. Humans want to work. Absolutely. You give people some help, and then they become self-sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
That's generally how humans operate.
Right.
So what's happening at our border is a failure of Congress to have an orderly system, to provide enough resources for that system. And it's also a failure of state and private cooperation, because we certainly have employers who are desperate to hire new employees, desperate. So why are we letting people come in and not letting them have work authorization so they can immediately get jobs?
Start paying taxes.
It makes no sense.
Mm-hmm.
And let's not forget, most of these people who are coming in, they're coming in with permission. They're being paroled into the United States. Parole is generally good for 2 years. Most of them are in deportation proceedings, which means they're going to have a hearing with an immigration judge in the next year or two. Some of them will be able to apply for asylum. They may not get it. But when you make an application for asylum, you have to wait 6 months from the date you file your asylum application before you can apply for a work permit.
Mm-hmm.
So it's mind-boggling that Congress doesn't say, okay, if we parole someone in, they can immediately get a work permit and process that application within a couple of days, which we're fully capable of doing as a nation. But Congress has to do that. Congress has to pass that law.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing too, which is really upsetting, I think most Americans should be upset about this. Customs and Border Protection is our largest federal agency in the United States. We
Mm,
fund them at 17 billion a year. They have
mhm,
over 60,000 federal employees. They process over 1 million people per day at our ports of entry, per day. So
mhm,
we are screaming and crying about an extra 2 million people coming in a year.
mhm,
We absolutely have the resources to handle that
mhm,
with CBP. Now, so if CBP is overwhelmed, I would say that's a failure of leadership. It's a failure of management. And that's been true regardless who the president is.
mm, mhm, mhm, mhm,
This is something only Congress can fix. If CBP needs
mm,
their job to be easier, and I agree, we want law enforcement to um, have easier jobs, right? We want to support them.
mhm,
Congress could very easily create a way for people to come in legally in an orderly fashion, and that would make CBP's job a lot easier. And ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, could spend more time looking for people who pose a danger to the United States than just rounding up people who are just coming here to live and work in peace.
mm, mm,
That's a huge savings in taxpayer dollars, and it's a more efficient use of our federal employees' time. It makes
mhm,
us safer.
mm. Okay. Immigration attorney Sara Dady is today's guest on Making Waves. And just another reminder, if you're out there and you're enjoying the conversation, please feel free to make a comment or ask a question. We're prepared to field your questions, so bring it on. Um, Again, a little help from artificial intelligence, which tells me that the Biden administration has taken a number of steps to address the increase in encounters, including increasing the number of CBP personnel, expanding the use of technology to monitor the border, and working with countries of origin to address the root causes of migration. I know you've sort of told us what a much simpler solution would be to solving some of these things, but how effective do you think the administration's efforts have been?
Okay, well, that last one's critically important. It's critically important for the U.S. It's in our interest to do our best to stabilize neighboring countries where we're experiencing a large outflow of those countries' citizens to the U.S. Because they fear for their lives. Um, Sadly, under our asylum law, people who are fleeing generalized violence in a country don't qualify for asylum for generalized violence.
Hmm.
For asylum, they have to prove that they have been specifically targeted for harm because of something they can't change about themselves: race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. So even if you have someone who's targeted by a gang in El Salvador, that may not necessarily qualify them for asylum. But under current US law, that's the only option they have to apply for any kind of legal status in the US, to come to our
Mhm.
border and apply for it. But if the US made investments in our neighboring countries to reduce corruption in those countries, to mitigate climate change disasters, which also push people out,
Mhm.
Honduras is a good example of that,
Mhm.
um, then that would help lessen the flow of people to our border.
Mhm.
In terms of giving more money to CBP and hiring more CBP officers, that's not an effective solution because it doesn't acknowledge the real problem. The problem isn't the people coming to our border. The problem is they don't have a way to apply for a visa to the United States without coming to our border.
Mhm.
And that's a problem only Congress can solve. And
Mhm.
Congress could very easily do that if they had the will. So I have now practiced under 4 presidents, and presidential policies. Presidents have broad authority under our immigration laws to make policy, right? But what they can't do is change the law or give people legal status. Only Congress can do that.
Mhm.
So we have all these presidents working in this gray area trying to address people coming to the US seeking safety without the power of law. So we have all these policies that change from president to president that don't actually do anything to help the system. So again, you know, hiring more CBP officers would be like just hiring more state troopers to patrol a street that's full of potholes that
Mhm.
barely anyone can drive down anyway. So you want to start pulling over people who are trying to drive on the shoulder or go around. That doesn't fill in the potholes. It doesn't make the street more drivable. And we
Right.
need an immigration system that is drivable for the vast majority of people. And
Mhm.
again, these are people we need anyway. It's in our own national interest.
Right. Right. What do you think is holding up, trying to come up with a more effective approach to this?
It's Congress. Congress is the problem. So that's what prompted my run in 2018. I just became so frustrated with our immigration system and the pain that it causes people that are doing nothing but contributing to our country, that I decided to run as any American who sees that we could do better
Mhm.
um, in governing, absolutely should run for office and raise their voice. But we have a Congress, primarily now it's one party, the Republican Party, which is absolutely unwilling to modernize our immigration system, to help people that they believe broke the law. But we can certainly change the law. We have to be practical about things, um, which is interesting because Ronald Reagan was really good on immigration.
Hmm.
And I was no fan of Ronald Reagan, especially his economic policies, but he was excellent on immigration. Ronald Reagan is the president who signed the amnesty law to allow all of these undocumented agricultural workers that we had accumulated in the 1970s and 80s to apply for permanent residency. But the flip side of that was that they were supposed to set up a worker visa program, which would allow people to come in legally to work when we needed them. But Congress, the visa program they set up wasn't practical. It was only seasonal, it limited visa numbers. It was expensive for employers and lengthy. So a lot of times those visas don't get approved until after the harvest has already happened. So that's not helpful.
Mhm.
And also, it's tied to specific employers. So employers have to do this process. And that was ripe for worker exploitation because workers come in, and if they complain, the employer's like, well, I'm just going to pull your visa and you'll be deported. So don't complain about your working conditions.
Mhm.
Um, and it also didn't address jobs that are not seasonal, like dairy farms. Milk, cows have to be milked every day, 365 days a year. It's not seasonal. So we have a ton of undocumented workers still working in agriculture in the United States, especially in Wisconsin.
Mhm.
Um, and the Wisconsin state legislature wants to be tough on undocumented immigrants. And it's like, do you not know where your cheese comes from?
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
Congress really should let these people legalize their status. So, two steps. One, we need a broad legalization program to legalize the people who are here so we know who's here. And so they're paying their taxes and they're following the
Mhm.
law. You have to give them a process to do. And if you give people a process to apply for legal status, they are going to apply for legal status.
Mhm.
Um, and then two, we need a real worker visa program that is decoupled from employers that people can apply for outside the US, and those numbers should be dictated by the Department of Labor, right? So we know how many workers we can project out, how many workers we're going to need over the next, 3 to 5 years. And those visa numbers could be available. So then people can be screened, fingerprinted. And if they get approved, they can come in, start working, and they can work for any employer. That will also reduce worker exploitation and human trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
So if we did that, that would better regulate the flow of people. So, if people in Honduras and Nicaragua and Venezuela could apply for a 3-year work permit instead of making a dangerous journey on foot or bus or train to our border to ask for asylum, which they're probably not going to get anyway, that regulates the flow of people. It makes people safer, and it's bringing people here in an orderly fashion, which makes CBP's job easier.
Right, right.
And it saves us taxpayer dollars to boot.
Win, win, win.
So getting back to it, so the Republicans used to understand the importance of immigration to our economy. President Clinton in 1996 signed the worst immigration law we've ever had. It limited federal court review of immigration decisions. It created new grounds of deportation, new obstacles, new violations to disqualify people from getting green cards. So the Democrats used to be more immigration restrictionist, but now after 2005, the parties did a flip-flop. And now Democrats support modernizing our immigration system, but Republicans do not. So
Okay.
the party's done a flip.
Guess what? We have two questions, but Marianne Suprenant out there was reading my mind. This is exactly what I was going to ask you, is if you've ever been to the border and what you've seen, and if so, could you kind of put a human face on what happens there to people?
Sure. I've been to the border once many years ago, before all of these crises in these other countries are forcing so many people to come. And what I saw was Customs and Border Protection doing daily patrols, repairing holes that have been cut in fences so people could come through, which they did. And these were primarily groups of people led by human smugglers. So I saw people paying upwards of $10,000 to human smugglers who are often associated with drug cartels and criminal organizations, funding them to come into the United States. So that made me realize, well, if we let people pay $500 in a processing fee and fill out an application, be fingerprinted, of course they're going to choose to do that rather than pay $10,000 to a human smuggler for the privilege of being raped and or murdered or intercepted by CBP and put in deportation proceedings anyway. I mean, it makes no sense. But the desperation of people to come somewhere where they're safe and have opportunity, why can't we just let them apply for those visas in an orderly, humane fashion? Right. And they pay for themselves for the processing. So, people are going to continue to come to our border. The question is, how are we going to manage the flow of people? Which is the question that every nation that is experiencing an influx of people who have been displaced has to determine. And there seem to be, two schools of thought on that. One, build walls, tell people they can't come, be as unpleasant and as punishing as possible to deter people from coming, which doesn't recognize the root of the problem, that these people are in fear for their lives. This is not a Sunday stroll across the border. This is a real hard, dangerous journey that people only undertake if they feel like they have no other choice. So let's acknowledge that. Let's start processing people before they reach the border and give them a lawful way to come in through the border from the beginning.
Mhm.
That seems to be a less popular school of thought, but is
Mm.
certainly the most cost effective
Mhm.
and humane. So
Right, right, right.
why wouldn't
It
we give people a right way to apply to come? Why would we
Mhm,
focus
mhm,
on punishing people who feel they have no choice? That, if they stay in their home country, that's certain death. If they make the trek to the United States, that might be death, but it's not certain death.
mhm. Right, right. We have a follow-up from Marianne. She, asks, what would you recommend how to locate and identify is that what you call them? Do you call them gotaways? I've never heard
No,
that before.
no. People who enter without inspection.
Mhm,
Um, so if the vast majority of people coming to our border are coming in with inspection, that means they get in a line. When they get to the Customs and Border agent, they show them their documents. Customs and Border agent screens them, makes sure that they are who they say they are, that their documents were properly issued. And if they were, and there's no indication this person is a danger to the US, they're allowed to come in, right?
mhm,
That's what we do with over 1 million people per day at our airports, US citizens, permanent residents, people coming on tourist visas, student visas. Over 1 million people per day CBP processes. So if instead of having 200,000 people living in 10 cities outside of a border entry, these people could actually get in line with documents, then CBP could focus on the people who are trying to enter without inspection. Because if those people are entering without inspection, clearly they didn't qualify for a visa to come into the US. Um, and CBP can focus their energy on those people. I mean, it's really hard to catch, if you have 50 people running across the border at the same time, it's hard to catch all 50. But
mm,
if you only have one, that's a lot easier. That makes CBP's job easier. And then for people who are inside the United States who should not be here, that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement's job to identify, locate those people, and put them in removal proceedings, deportation
mhm,
proceedings.
mm,
So if, for example, under President Obama, he had a priority list by his second term of people for ICE to focus on for deportation proceedings, people who pose a danger to the U.S., who are involved in gang activity, drug trafficking, things like that.
mhm,
Under Trump, Trump's priority list was everyone's a priority. Even
mhm,
that guy who's been living here for 30 years, has 4 US citizen children, is married to a US citizen, but he has immigration violations that disqualify him for a green card. We're going to put that guy in deportation proceedings, even if he
mm,
has no criminal record and doesn't
mhm,
pose a danger. So then CBP, ICE had to spend all their resources picking up every single person they came across who has
mm,
an immigration violation. That's a lot of work. And there are not enough ICE agents to round up 10 million people.
right.
And then under President Biden, he changed the policy back to we're going to have a priority list. ICE, we want you to go after people who pose a danger to the United States, who pose a danger to public safety.
Mhm,
Don't waste government resources going after people who pose no danger. And, if we had a legalization program and these people who pose no danger to the US could get a green card, then ICE can really focus its resources on people who should not be here.
mhm,
And that's what we depend on law enforcement to do. So let's make their job easier.
right, right. I'm sold. Again, we are speaking to immigration attorney Sara Dady. Thanks so much for being here, Sarah. And a couple of last thoughts for you. You had just recently mentioned, running for Congress, and I was hoping to get your reaction to your opponent, Adam Kinzinger, uh, who ended up being one of the only Republicans who voted to impeach President Trump. What was your reaction to that?
Well, my reaction to that was I would have voted to impeach twice, both times, not just the one time. And two, he got kicked out of his own party for having integrity. I mean, it's horrific that, our Congress is so dysfunctional because one party is so dysfunctional. You know, I mean, Adam Kinzinger, I disagree with him on probably 95% of all policies and
Hmm.
issues. Um, but at least he believes in democracy and integrity. Why can't we have more people who believe in democracy being elected to
Mm.
Congress?
Hmm.
And how can we have a party that kicks those people out? Look at Liz Cheney.
Right.
You don't get more conservative than Liz Cheney.
Mm.
And she got kicked out of her own party for
Hmm.
having integrity to say, look, we're not going to start insurrections and support insurrections to overturn election results. That's just
Hmm.
not who we are as a
Hmm.
nation.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, if I mean, I think it seems like just from a long-term expatriates perspective, that if we could maintain that covenant at least, then maybe there's a possibility that we could work on, for example, immigration policy.
It's just about getting back to good governance, right? We're running the world's last superpower. Um, we have to continually maintain and tinker with it. What is not helpful is wanting to use government power and laws to punish people we think we don't like.
Mm.
That's never acceptable
Mm. Mm.
morally, ethically, or even when it comes to governance. That's never a good policy.
Mm.
Our laws and our resources should be used to make us stronger and make people stronger.
Mm. Mm.
And we can certainly do that. And
Mm.
immigration is a great opportunity to make us stronger economically,
Mm.
to secure our national security interests,
Mm.
and meet our humanitarian obligations. As a nation, we should be a leader in the world saying, this is how you treat people with
Mm.
respect and dignity under the law. It doesn't mean everybody's going to get what they want, but they're going to be given an opportunity to be heard. They're going to have an
Mm.
opportunity to make an application, have it heard by a fair, neutral decision maker. And if it gets approved, welcome. If it does not get approved, then you have to go.
Mm.
It's an orderly system. It doesn't have to be punitive. It doesn't have to be mean. It doesn't have to be hateful.
Mm.
And
Mm.
that's what we need. That's why we need
Right.
immigration reform passed by reasonable people.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, getting back to sort of your everyday work, what would you say the most rewarding part of it is?
When that green card arrives in the mail.
Hmm.
And also, I do citizenship cases, naturalization.
Hmm.
So when my clients get approved and then they're sworn in as U.S. citizens and they can vote.
Hmm.
That's amazing to me. I love to take people from no legal status to permanent residency, then to
Hmm.
citizenship. And I
Hmm.
always tell people, once you become a citizen, you're no longer my problem because you can never be deported.
Right. Right. Excellent.
So it
Excellent.
gives me such a feeling of satisfaction and pride.
Mm. Hmm.
And people
Hmm.
want to be citizens, they want to be part of this nation. They want to be one of us. I mean,
Hmm.
that is such a compliment to us.
Mm.
I don't
Hmm.
understand how people can be so threatened
Hmm.
by people wanting to be like us, to
Right.
join
Right.
us. I mean, that's a
Mm.
compliment.
Mm. It really does kind of mean that they kind of want to play by the rules of the society as well, no?
If you give people rules to follow, generally they're going to follow the rules. Are there
Mm.
exceptions? Yes, but that's why we have law enforcement, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
if you give them a line to get in, they'll get in the line as long as that line is going to move and they're going to be treated fairly.
Mm. Mhm.
And for
Mm.
people that don't want to get in the line, that's why we have law enforcement.
Mm.
But
Mhm.
you
Mm.
have to give people a line to get in. Right now, there is not a line for the majority of people in this world to get in to even ask to come to the United States.
Right.
Just give people a line.
Mm. Mhm. Okay. And, Sarah, what do you think we should be on the lookout for when it comes to US immigration policy going forward?
Well, that's going to be depend on who the president is. The
Mhm.
president always sets the policy for U.S. immigration, And Trump is more in the camp of an immigration restrictionist, which we saw in the 1920s in this country. Biden is in the camp of wanting to regulate the flow of people in a humane and fair manner. He can only do so much. And at the end of the day, though, it's not the president's fault. It's Congress's fault. So we'll see what happens next year's election. Congress is all the seats in Congress are up for election in the House. But if we get a majority of Democrats and we get a Democrat in the White House, I really hope we will see significant work to modernize our immigration system. Otherwise, more potholes are just going to keep opening, and it's just going to get worse for everyone.
In regards to this topic, do you think there's anything else that we should know, Sara?
Yes. I think that when you read stories about the increasing number of border apprehensions, you need to understand that not everyone has a legal way to come. And this is what the U.S. immigration system is. This is how it's set up. People, if they want to come in, they just have to show up at the border and take their chances. I mean, this is them following the law that we have. If you don't like it, the law needs to change.
Excellent. So our time on Making Waves has come to an end. Thanks to everyone for tuning in, and thanks to Marianne for her questions. Sara Dady is just one of the spectacular individuals doing amazing things in a difficult world that I plan on continuing to interview on Making Waves. So watch this space and stay tuned. Thanks so much again, Sara. Have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
All right. Take care.